Hello, beautiful souls, and welcome back to Her Journey, where we share stories of resilience, strength, and triumph. If this is your first time here, please hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell because today's story will leave you speechless. This is the story of Beatrice Eugene, a 77-year-old woman who discovered that sometimes the people closest to you can be your greatest enemies. But more importantly, it's about how she fought back and reclaimed her power. So grab your tissues, settle in, and let's dive into Beatrice's incredible journey. My name is Beatrice Eugene, and at 77 years old, I thought I knew everything there was to know about heartbreak. I was wrong. Dead wrong. It was a Tuesday morning in September when my world first started to tilt off its axis, though I wouldn't recognize the signs for months to come. I was arranging fresh white lilies beside Harold's photograph, my husband of 52 years who'd been gone for 4 years but whose absence still felt like a fresh wound some mornings. "Mama, did you take your heart medication this morning?" The voice belonged to my youngest daughter, Crystal, floating from the kitchen with that particular blend of concern and impatience that had become her signature tune. At 32, Crystal was my miracle baby, born when I was 45 after years of believing my childbearing days were over. She'd moved back home after Harold's funeral, claiming she wanted to take care of me. What a fool I was to believe that. "Yes, honey, I've been managing my own medication for longer than you've been alive," I called back, but kept my voice light. I'd learned that any hint of independence was met with lectures about my age and mental state. I watched her through the doorway as she rifled through my mail with the efficiency of a practice thief, though at the time, I thought she was just being helpful. My other children, Marcus and David, had established their lives years ago. Marcus was a successful cardiologist in Atlanta, and David ran his own construction company in Miami. But Crystal? Crystal was perpetually finding herself, a journey that had lasted over a decade and cost me more money than I cared to calculate. "The property tax bill came today," she mentioned casually, slipping the envelope into her oversized Louis Vuitton purse, a gift I'd bought her for her 30th birthday. "I'll handle it like always." Something in her tone made me pause. "Actually, sweetheart, I'd like to see that first. I should know what my own bills look like." The transformation was instant and terrifying. Her head snapped up, eyes narrowing into slits that reminded me of a snake I'd once seen in Harold's garden. "Why?" "So you can worry yourself sick over numbers? You have enough stress with your heart condition, Mama. I'm protecting you." There it was, the word that had become her weapon of choice. Protection. She'd been protecting me from my own finances since Harold's 18-month battle with pancreatic cancer, gradually taking control of our accounts while I was drowning in hospital visits and treatment schedules. "I'm not an invalid, Crystal. Being a widow doesn't make me incompetent." She sighed with theatrical exhaustion, a performance I'd seen countless times. "Marcus called earlier. That malpractice lawsuit is eating him alive." He sounded stressed beyond belief. The subject change was smooth, practiced. My oldest son had been fighting a frivolous lawsuit for nearly 2 years, and Crystal never missed an opportunity to use his troubles as a distraction from uncomfortable conversations. "Maybe I should call him back," I suggested, reaching for my phone. "I already told him you were resting." Her tone sharpened like a blade. "Mama, I'm the only one who stayed to take care of you. Everyone else is too busy with their perfect lives to be bothered." Guilt. Her second favorite weapon. I swallowed my objection and nodded, not knowing I was signing my own financial death warrant with that simple gesture. That evening, over a dinner of Harold's favorite pot roast, which I'd taught Crystal to make during one of her brief domestic phases, she casually mentioned needing money for another photography course. This one was in Los Angeles, she said, and would finally give her the skills to launch her career. "How much?" I asked, though I already knew I'd say yes. I always said yes. 10,000. I know it sounds like a lot, but this instructor has connections with National Geographic. This could be my breakthrough, Mama. I stared at my daughter, really looked at her for the first time in months. Designer clothes, perfect manicure, hairstyled in an expensive cut that cost more than most people spent on groceries in a month. For someone who claimed to be struggling financially, she certainly didn't look the part. Crystal, honey, have you considered looking for study work? Something that could provide a foundation while you pursue photography? The fork clattered against her plate like a gunshot. Here we go again. Marcus got that fancy apartment during his residency. David got help with his construction business down payment. But Crystal? Crystal gets lectures about responsibility. That's not true, sweetheart. You know how much we've invested in your dreams over the years. Invested? She laughed, but there was no humor in it. Is that what we're calling it now? Because it feels more like you've always believed I was your biggest disappointment. The manipulation was masterful, I'll give her that. She'd learned to weaponize my love, turning every conversation into an emotional minefield where I was always the villain. That night, I wrote her a check for $10,000, watching her face light up with what I thought was gratitude, but now recognize as triumph. As I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling fan Harold had installed the summer before his diagnosis, a small voice in the back of my mind whispered that something wasn't right. But grief had taught me to doubt my instincts, to second-guess every thought and feeling. So I silenced that voice and went to sleep, completely unaware that my own daughter had been systematically destroying my future for years. The phone call that would change everything came 3 weeks later. Mrs. Eugene, this is Patricia Williams from First National Bank. We have an urgent situation that requires your immediate attention. I was in my garden, deadheading the roses Harold had planted for our 40th anniversary, when my phone rang. The banker's voice carried an edge that made my stomach clench with immediate dread. What kind of situation? I asked, sinking onto the garden bench Harold had built with his own hands. There's been an attempt to increase your credit limit to $75,000. Our fraud protection system flagged it because the request came from an IP address that doesn't match your usual location patterns. Mrs. Eugene, did you request this increase? The world tilted sideways. I would never request anything like that. I barely use credit cards. That's what we suspected. Mrs. Eugene, I think you need to come to the branch immediately. There are some discrepancies in your account that require discussion. 2 hours later, I sat across from Patricia Williams, a kind-faced woman in her 50s who handled the bank's elder protection services. The folder in front of her was thick enough to choke a horse, and every page told a story I didn't recognize. These transactions, she said gently, pointing to a printout that looked like a foreign language to me. Do any of these look familiar? I scanned the dates and amounts, my heart sinking with each line. Withdrawals of $3,000, $5,000, $8,000, sometimes multiple times per week. Credit card purchases at high-end boutiques, electronic stores, even a down payment on a car I'd never seen. I didn't authorize any of these, I whispered, my voice barely audible. But they're all signed with my name. Patricia nodded grimly. The most recent transaction was, yesterday, a $15,000 withdrawal. Do you recall anything about that? Yesterday. Crystal had been out all afternoon, claiming she was meeting with potential clients about wedding photography. She'd come home with shopping bags from Nordstrom and a story about finding incredible sales. Mrs. Eugene, Patricia continued carefully, does anyone else have access to your banking information? Passwords, account numbers, identification documents. The question hung in the air like a death sentence. I knew the answer, had probably known it for months, but saying it aloud would make it real. Would make my daughter a criminal instead of just irresponsible. My daughter helps me with my finances, I managed to say. Patricia's expression remained professionally neutral, but I caught the flicker of sympathy in her eyes. I see. Mrs. Eugene, I need to ask you to not confront anyone about this yet. First, we need to secure your accounts. Then we need to document everything before taking any action. I left the bank with temporary passwords, frozen credit cards, and a hole in my chest where my heart used to be. The drive home was a blur of tears and rage and disbelief. How could I have been so blind? How could the child I'd carried beneath my heart, nursed through countless illnesses, supported through every failure and setback, have betrayed me so completely? Crystal was waiting when I got home, perched on the living room sofa, like she belonged there. Which I suddenly realized she didn't. Not anymore. Where have you been, Mama? I was worried sick. You didn't answer your phone. The concern in her voice sounded genuine, but now I heard the performance beneath it. How long had she been acting for me? How many years of fake worry and manufactured love? I had some errands to run, I said carefully, watching her face for any telltale signs of guilt. Banking business. Banking business? She stood up quickly, too quickly. Is everything okay? You know how those bank people try to confuse elderly customers. They're always pushing unnecessary services. Elderly customers. The phrase hit me like a slap. To her, I wasn't her mother. I was a mark, a target, an elderly customer to be exploited. Everything's fine, sweetheart. I lied, the words tasting like poison in my mouth. Just routine account maintenance. That night, after Crystal had gone to bed, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of Harold's favorite coffee and a yellow legal pad. I wrote down everything I could remember, every suspicious transaction Patricia had shown me, every time Crystal had intercepted my mail, every financial conversation that had fell off. The list was 3 pages long by the time I finished. For the first time since Harold's death, I felt something other than grief consuming me. It was rage, pure and hot and clarifying. My daughter hadn't just stolen my money. She'd stolen my trust, my peace of mind, my sense of security in my own home. She'd turned my love into her weapon and my grief into her opportunity. But she'd made one crucial mistake. She'd underestimated me. I'd been Beatrice Eugene long before I was anyone's mother. I'd built a successful real estate business from nothing, raised 3 children while Harold traveled for work, and survived the devastating loss of my life partner. I was stronger than she knew, smarter than she'd counted on, and angrier than she could possibly imagine. As I sat there in the dark kitchen, surrounded by the ghosts of happier times, I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to be a victim anymore. I was going to be a survivor. And Crystal was about to learn the difference. The war was about to begin, and she had no idea who she was fighting. The next morning, I called Patricia Williams before Crystal woke up. I need help, I said without preamble. Professional help. Someone who specializes in this kind of fraud. I was hoping you'd say that, Patricia replied. I have some contacts. There's a private investigator who works specifically with financial elder abuse cases, Diana Rodriguez. She's expensive, but she's the best. There's also a lawyer, James Mitchell, who handles these situations. Would you like me to arrange meetings? Yes, but I need them to understand something. This isn't just about getting my money back. I want justice. Patricia was quiet for a moment. Mrs. Eugene, I have to ask, are you prepared for how difficult this might get? Family cases are particularly challenging emotionally. I thought about Crystal's performance the night before, the way she'd looked me in the eye while expressing fake concern about my well-being. The same eyes that had watched me grieve Harold's death, while she systematically robbed me blind. She stopped being my daughter the moment she decided I was just another mark, I said. I'm prepared for whatever it takes. 3 days later, I sat in Diana Rodriguez's downtown office, studying the woman who would become my general in this war. Mid-40s, steel gray hair pulled into a severe bun, wearing a black suit that screamed no-nonsense professionalism. She had the kind of direct gaze that suggested she'd seen every type of human evil and wasn't shocked by any of it anymore. "Tell me everything," she said, opening a thick notebook. "And I mean everything. Don't protect anyone. Don't make excuses. Don't sugarcoat. I need facts." For the next 2 hours, I laid out my story. Diana took notes in shorthand, occasionally asking clarifying questions that revealed just how deep the deception went. "How long has she had access to your mail?" Diana asked. "Since Harold got sick." "Maybe 4 years." "Banking passwords." "She helped me set up online banking after Harold died. Said it would be easier for me." "Keys to your safety deposit box?" I felt sick. She insisted I add her as a joint holder for emergencies. Diana's expression grew grimmer with each revelation. When I finished, she set down her pen and looked at me with something that might have been respect. "Mrs. Eugene, in my 15 years of doing this work, your case is among the most systematic and sophisticated I've encountered. Your daughter isn't just opportunistic, she's calculating. This level of manipulation requires planning and intelligence. Is that good or bad for my chances of justice?" "It's good," Diana said with a smile that was absolutely predatory. "Smart criminals leave more evidence. They get overconfident, and overconfidence leads to mistakes." She outlined her investigation process: financial forensics, surveillance, documentation of every fraudulent transaction. It would take weeks, maybe months, but when she was finished, Crystal would have nowhere to hide. "I need you to promise me something," Diana continued. "No matter what we discover, no matter how angry you get, you cannot confront her until I give you the all-clear. If she suspects we're investigating, evidence will disappear. Can you do that?" I thought about the Academy Award-worthy performance Crystal had given me every day for 4 years. Trust me, I can act better than she can. The next week, I began living a double life. On the surface, I was still the grieving widow, dependent on her daughter's help and grateful for her sacrifice. Beneath, I was a woman on a mission, working with a team of professionals to document a betrayal so complete it took my breath away. I watched Crystal check my mail each morning, casually pocketing anything financial. I observed her taking phone calls in private, speaking in hushed tones about liquid assets and timeline adjustments. I noticed how she'd angle her body to hide her phone screen when banking notifications came through. Every interaction was recorded in a journal Diana had given me. Every suspicious behavior was noted and time-stamped. Slowly, methodically, we built our case. But the real breakthrough came when Diana called me 3 weeks into the investigation. "Beatrice, I need you to sit down. We found something big." I was in my bedroom, where I'd been spending more time lately to avoid Crystal's increasingly suspicious glances. "What is it?" "Harold's life insurance policy. The one worth $500,000 that was supposed to be divided equally among your 3 children. My blood went cold. "What about it?" "Crystal received the entire amount. She forged documents showing that Marcus and David had waived their inheritance rights. The insurance company has copies of their signatures on file, signatures that a handwriting expert has already confirmed are fraudulent." The phone slipped from my hand. $500,000. My son's inheritance, stolen by their own sister. Money that Harold had worked decades to provide for his children, stolen by the one child who'd never worked an honest day in her life. When I picked up the phone, Diana was still talking. "There's more. She used that money as a down payment on a penthouse apartment in Miami. It's currently being rented out for $8,000 a month, income she's never reported to you or to the IRS. She told me she was struggling financially," I whispered. "She said she couldn't afford her own place." "Beatrice, your daughter owns property worth $1.2 million and has been collecting rental income for 3 years. She's not struggling. She's thriving." Off your money and your son's inheritance. That night, as Crystal sat across from me at dinner, chattering about her latest photography project and how she really needed to upgrade her camera equipment, I studied her like a scientist examining a particularly toxic specimen. The designer watch on her wrist, paid for with Harold's insurance money. The expensive highlights in her hair, funded by my fraudulent credit cards. The confident way she reached for the wine bottle, purchased with money stolen from her own brothers. "You know, Mama," she said, refilling her glass, "I've been thinking. Maybe it's time you consider moving into a retirement community. This house is getting too big for you, and I worry about you being alone." There it was, the final piece of her plan. Move me into a facility where she could control my environment completely, then sell the house Harold and I had built together. Probably already had a buyer lined up. "That's thoughtful of you to worry, sweetheart," I said, my voice steady as stone. "But I'm not ready for that step yet." Her smile faltered for just a moment, so briefly that the old Beatrice would have missed it. But I wasn't the old Beatrice anymore. I was a woman who saw everything, missed nothing, and forgot even less. "Of course, Mama. Just something to keep in mind for the future." The future. If she only knew what I had planned for her future, she wouldn't be sitting there so smugly, sipping wine bought with blood money. But she'd find out soon enough. We all would. For months into Diana's investigation, I received a call that changed everything. "We need to meet immediately," Diana said, her voice tight with excitement. "And you need to call James Mitchell. We're ready to move." I drove to Diana's office with my heart hammering against my ribs. In the 4 months since discovering Crystal's betrayal, I'd maintained my performance perfectly. The grieving widow who needed her daughter's help. The confused elderly woman who couldn't possibly manage her own affairs. But inside, I'd been transforming into something Crystal never saw coming. Diana's office looked like a command center. Charts covered the walls, linking dates and transactions with colored strings like a murder investigation. Computer screens displayed bank records, property deeds, and surveillance photos. It was beautiful and terrifying and absolutely damning. "Sit down, Beatrice," Diana said, but her excitement was infectious. "We've got her." She opened a laptop and began clicking through files. "We've documented $380,000 in fraudulent transactions over 4 years. That's separate from the insurance money, which brings the total to $880,000. I felt dizzy. Nearly $1 million. From one woman's retirement funds and a dead man's final gift to his children. "But that's not all," Diana continued. "Remember how she always claimed to be broke? Look at this." The screen showed bank statements for accounts I'd never seen before. Crystal Eugene Financial Services.
Sear Investment Holdings.
Ciani Property Management. She's been running multiple businesses using your initial investments as startup capital. The photography courses you paid for? Never existed. That money went into business incorporation fees and equipment purchases. What kind of businesses? Real estate flipping. Small loan operations. Event planning. She's actually quite entrepreneurial when she's not busy playing the struggling artist. Diana pulled up property records. She owns 4 rental properties, a commercial building, and has significant stock investments. Conservative estimate of her net worth? $2.8 million. The room spun around me. While I'd been eating generic groceries and worrying about prescription copays, my daughter had been building a real estate empire with my money. "There's more," Diana said grimly. "The heart medication scare last month? When she rushed you to the emergency room claiming you'd had an episode? I remembered. I'd felt fine, but Crystal had insisted I was having symptoms. The hospital had run tests, found nothing wrong, and sent me home with instructions to follow up with my cardiologist. She listed herself as your emergency contact and healthcare proxy. She's been in communication with your doctor, claiming you're showing signs of dementia and confusion. My blood turned to ice. What? She's been building a case for incompetency. Medical records show a pattern of family concerns about your mental state. If you'd agreed to that retirement home, she would have had complete control of your finances within 6 months. The scope of the manipulation was breathtaking. Not content with stealing my past, she'd been systematically arranging to steal my future too. What about Marcus and David? Do they know about the insurance money? Diana shook her head. According to our investigation, they have no idea. Crystal forged their signatures on waiver documents and handled all communication with the insurance company. As far as they know, the policy is still being processed. 3 hours later, I sat in James Mitchell's law office, staring at documents that would destroy my daughter's life as thoroughly as she'd tried to destroy mine. Criminal charges, civil forfeiture, asset seizure. The legal terms washed over me like a cleansing flood. Mrs. Eugene, James said, his voice gentle but firm, I need you to understand what we're talking about here. If we proceed with criminal charges, Crystal will almost certainly face prison time. This isn't just family drama, it's serious federal fraud. How long? With the evidence Diana has compiled? 7 to 10 years, possibly more. And she'll have to make full restitution, which means liquidating her assets. I thought about Harold, about the nights he'd stayed up late working on business plans, sacrificing his health to build security for his family. I thought about Marcus and David, who'd been robbed of their father's final gift. I thought about myself, sitting in this expensive lawyer's office at 77 years old, because my own daughter had spent 4 years treating me like her personal ATM. I want her to face consequences for every dollar she stole, I said. Every forged signature, every lie, every manipulation. I want justice. James nodded. There's one more thing we need to discuss. How do you want to handle telling Marcus and David? That stopped me cold. My sons had no idea their sister was a criminal, no idea they'd been robbed of their inheritance. The conversation would destroy our family forever. But then I remembered Crystal's smug smile as she'd suggested the retirement home. The way she'd patted my hand condescendingly while planning to warehouse me somewhere convenient. The 4 years of fake love and manufactured concern while she systematically robbed me blind. I'll handle my sons, I said. They deserve to know the truth. 2 days later, I made the phone calls that would change everything. Marcus first, then David. Both were shocked into silence when I explained what I discovered. Both immediately offered to fly home. Both asked the same question. How did we miss this? Because she's very good at what she does, I told them. And because we wanted to believe she'd finally found her way. What do you need from us, Mom? David asked, his construction worker's pragmatism cutting through the emotion. I need you to be strong. I need you to support my decision to press charges. And I need you to understand that after this, Crystal won't be part of our family anymore. The silence on the phone was deafening. Mom, Marcus said finally, his doctor's training helping him stay clinical. Are you sure about this? Once we start legal proceedings, there's no going back. I looked around the kitchen where I'd raised 3 children, where Harold and I had shared morning coffee for 5 decades, where Crystal had eaten countless meals paid for with stolen money while planning my destruction. She made her choice 4 years ago, I said. Now I'm making mine. The trap was set. The evidence was compiled. The legal team was ready. All that remained was to spring it. And I knew exactly how I wanted to do it. I chose a Sunday for the confrontation. Sundays had always been family days in the Eugene household, Harold's tradition that had survived his death. Crystal would be expecting our usual routine, church, brunch, and lazy afternoon conversation. What she wouldn't be expecting was Marcus and David walking through the front door at 10 a.m. sharp. Boys. Crystal's surprise seemed genuine as she hugged her brothers. What are you doing here? Nobody told me you were coming. It was a last-minute decision, Marcus said, his physician's training helping him maintain a neutral expression. We needed to discuss some family business. David, never as good at hiding his emotions, kept his responses short and looked uncomfortable. Crystal, ever perceptive when it came to reading situations to her advantage, immediately picked up on the tension. Is everything okay? Is it about Mama's health? Actually, I said, entering the living room with a tray of coffee, it's about my finances. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. I watched Crystal's face carefully, noting the micro-expressions Diana had taught me to recognize. The brief flicker of panic quickly masked by confusion. The way her hand instinctively moved toward her purse. The subtle shift in posture that suggested flight response. Your finances? She asked, sitting down carefully. Mama, are you having problems? I thought we were managing everything fine. The word, we, hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Marcus and David exchanged glances, both picking up on the possessive pronoun their sister had used. That's actually what we need to discuss, I said, taking my seat at the head of the room, Harold's old spot that I'd reclaimed for this moment. I've been reviewing my accounts with some financial professionals, and there seem to be some discrepancies. Crystal's laugh sounded forced. Discrepancies? Mama, you know how confused you get with numbers. That's why I handle all that boring stuff for you. Confused? David's voice carried an edge that made Crystal look at him sharply. Mom built a real estate empire, Crystal. She was managing complex financial portfolios before you were born. That was years ago, Crystal said dismissively. People's mental capacity changes as they age. It's perfectly normal. Marcus leaned forward. Are you suggesting our mother is mentally impaired? I'm not suggesting anything, Crystal snapped, then caught herself and softened her tone. I'm just saying that financial management is stressful for elderly people. I've been protecting her from that stress. Protecting me, I repeated slowly. Is that what you call it? Something in my tone must have warned her, because Crystal's expression shifted to high alert. Mama, what's this really about? Are these boys putting ideas in your head about how I've been taking care of you? The accusation was perfect, turning my sons into the villains while positioning herself as the devoted caregiver. It was exactly the kind of manipulation I'd watched her perfect over the years. Actually, I said, reaching for the folder Diana had prepared, this is about some very specific transactions I'd like you to explain. I placed the first bank statement on the coffee table. Crystal's face went white as she recognized the account number. This shows a withdrawal of $15,000 made 3 weeks ago, I continued. Can you help me remember what that was for? Crystal's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. You said I could take care of the property tax bill, and there were some other expenses. The property tax bill was $3,200, Marcus said quietly. I looked it up. I placed another statement on the table. This shows withdrawals totaling $47,000 over the past 6 months. All signed with my name, but interestingly, the handwriting analysis shows significant inconsistencies with my actual signature. Handwriting analysis? Crystal's voice was barely a whisper. Oh, yes, I said, my voice growing stronger with each revelation. I've been working with some very thorough professionals. Would you like to see the forensic report? David was staring at his sister like he'd never seen her before. Crystal, what did you do? I didn't do anything. The mask was slipping now, desperation creeping into her voice. Mama asked me to help with her finances. Sometimes signatures look different when people are stressed or tired. This is ridiculous. I placed the next document on the table. Harold's insurance policy. This is your father's life insurance policy, I said, watching Crystal's face crumble as she realized how deep my investigation had gone. The one worth $500,000 that was supposed to be divided equally among his 3 children. Marcus picked up the document, his medical training helping him read the complex legal language quickly. His face grew darker with each line. According to this, he said slowly, David and I waived our inheritance rights. That's interesting, David said, his construction worker's hands clenching into fists, because I never signed anything like that. Neither did I, Marcus added, his voice deadly quiet. Crystal was hyperventilating now, her careful composure completely shattered.
You don't understand.
I needed that money. I was the one who stayed, who took care of them both during Daddy's illness. I deserved it more than you two, who couldn't be bothered to visit. Deserved it. David's voice rose. You forged our signatures and stole our inheritance. It wasn't stealing, Crystal screamed. It was compensation for everything I sacrificed while you two lived your perfect lives. The truth was finally coming out, ugly and raw and undeniable. I felt a strange sense of peace wash over me. This was the daughter I'd been supporting for years, not a struggling artist, but a calculating criminal who felt entitled to everything I'd worked for. There's more, I said quietly, placing the final stack of documents on the table. Property records showing the 4 rental properties you own. Bank statements for your 3 business accounts. Investment portfolios worth over $1 million. Marcus was reading through the papers with the methodical precision of someone accustomed to analyzing complex information.
Jesus Christ, Crystal.
You've been running businesses while telling Mom you couldn't afford your own apartment. Where did you think she was living? David asked, pieces finally clicking into place. She said she couldn't afford rent, but she's never here except for dinner and to go through Mom's mail. Crystal's composure collapsed entirely. You don't understand what it's been like. Watching everyone else succeed while I was stuck taking care of aging parents. Do you know what I gave up? The opportunities one lost. You mean the opportunities you created with stolen money? I asked. She whirled on me, and for the first time, I saw her clearly. Not my youngest child, not the miracle baby I'd cherished, but a stranger who'd been wearing my daughter's face while destroying my life. You should have died instead of Daddy, she shrieked. At least he appreciated what I was doing for this family. The words hit like physical blows. Marcus and David both recoiled as if they'd been slapped. The silence that followed was absolute. I stood up slowly, drawing on reserves of strength I'd forgotten I possessed. Get out, I said quietly. Mama, I didn't mean. Get out. The force of my voice surprised even me. Get out of my house, and don't you ever come back. Crystal looked desperately at her brothers, seeking some support, some sign that this could be fixed. But Marcus and David were staring at her with a combination of disgust and disbelief that told her everything she needed to know. You can't do this, she said, backing toward the door. I'm your daughter. I took care of you. You were never taking care of me, I said. You were harvesting me. After she left, the 3 of us sat in stunned silence. Finally, Marcus spoke. Mom, how long have you known? For months, I admitted. I've been working with investigators and lawyers to document everything. Why didn't you tell us sooner? David asked. I looked at my sons, good men who'd built honest lives and raised their own families with integrity. Men who'd trusted their sister and been betrayed as thoroughly as I had. Because I needed to be sure, I said. And because I needed to be strong enough to see this through to the end. What happens now? Marcus asked. I reached for the phone to call James Mitchell. Now, I said, she faces the consequences. The criminal complaint was filed on a Tuesday morning. By that afternoon, Crystal was in custody. Her shocked face splashed across the local news as the anchor described the charges: elder abuse, fraud, forgery, and theft totaling nearly $1 million. I watched the coverage from my kitchen table, feeling strangely detached from the proceedings. This wasn't my daughter being arrested. This was a stranger who'd been impersonating my daughter for years, and now the charade was finally over. My phone rang constantly. Neighbors, church members, old friends who'd seen the news and couldn't believe sweet Crystal Eugene could be capable of such crimes. Each conversation followed the same pattern: shock, disbelief, and inevitably, the question I'd been dreading. How could you have your own daughter arrested? The first few times I tried to explain. The evidence, the investigation, the systematic theft. But I quickly learned that people didn't want explanations. They wanted the comfortable fiction that family loyalty mattered more than justice, that blood was thicker than criminal behavior. So I stopped explaining and started hanging up. Marcus and David, however, were firmly in my corner. Both had flown back to help me navigate the legal proceedings and media attention. Both had also hired their own attorneys to pursue the recovery of their stolen inheritance. I keep thinking about all the times she called me, crying about being broke, David said as we sat in James Mitchell's office, reviewing the seizure orders that would freeze Crystal's assets. Meanwhile, she was collecting $8,000 a month in rental income. Marcus shook his head, still processing the scope of the deception. The medical records are what get me. She's been telling my colleagues that Mom was showing signs of dementia, that the family was concerned about her mental state. I had other doctors asking me about Mom's cognitive function. She was building a case for incompetency, James explained. If you hadn't discovered the fraud when you did, she would have had you declared mentally unfit within the year. Then she'd have had complete legal control over your assets. The thought sent chills down my spine. Not content with stealing my past, Crystal had been systematically planning to steal my future too. Every loving gesture, every concerned look, every suggestion about retirement homes, it had all been part of a calculated plan to warehouse me somewhere convenient while she liquidated everything Harold and I had built. What's the timeline looking like? I asked. The arraignment is tomorrow, James said. She'll probably be released on bail, but with asset freezes in place. The prosecution is very interested in this case. Elder abuse has become a priority, and your daughter's operation was sophisticated enough to warrant federal attention. Federal attention. My daughter was now the subject of a federal investigation. The thought should have devastated me, but instead, I felt a grim satisfaction. She'd been so proud of her intelligence, so confident in her ability to manipulate and deceive. Let her explain her brilliance to federal prosecutors. That evening, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Crystal's number. Are you going to answer it? Marcus asked. I stared at the phone, remembering 4 years of calls where she'd manipulated me into giving her money, signing documents, trusting her with my life. 4 years of performance art designed to separate me from my security and dignity. I let it go to voicemail. When I played the message later, Crystal's voice was different, smaller, more desperate than I'd ever heard it. Mama, please. I know you're angry, but we can work this out. I can pay everything back. I never meant to hurt you. Please call me back. Please don't let them destroy our family over money. Money. Even now, facing federal charges, she was minimizing what she'd done. This wasn't about money. It was about 4 years of systematic psychological abuse disguised as caregiving. It was about forging documents and lying to doctors and planning to have me declared incompetent. It was about stealing her brother's inheritance and showing no remorse until she got caught. I deleted the message without listening to it again. The arraignment was a media circus. Crystal appeared in an orange jumpsuit, her designer wardrobe replaced by county jail attire. Her lawyer, a public defender who looked barely old enough to vote, tried to argue for reduced bail based on her role as primary caregiver to an elderly mother. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Sarah Chen, wasn't having it. Your Honor, she said, the defendant systematically defrauded her elderly mother out of nearly $1 million while positioning herself to gain complete control over the victim's assets. She forged legal documents, committed identity theft, and was actively working to have her mother declared mentally incompetent. This wasn't opportunistic theft. It was a sophisticated, long-term operation designed to strip an elderly woman of her independence and financial security. The defendant is a flight risk and a continued danger to the victim. Bail was set at $500,000. Crystal's face crumpled as she realized she'd have to liquidate assets to secure her release, assets that were now frozen pending the outcome of the case. As I walked out of the courthouse, reporters shouted questions at me. How did it feel to have my own daughter arrested? Was I sure about the charges? Didn't I want to give her a chance to make things right? I stopped on the courthouse steps and looked directly into the cameras. My daughter made her choices over the past 4 years, I said, my voice steady and clear. She chose to steal from me, to lie to me, and to betray the trust one placed in her. Now she gets to live with the consequences of those choices. Justice isn't about family loyalty, it's about accountability. The clip would play on every local news station for the next week. 3 days later, I got a call from Diana Rodriguez. Beatrice, you need to sit down. We found something else. My heart sank. What now? Crystal's been in contact with a life insurance agent. She took out a policy on your life 18 months ago, $750,000, with herself as the sole beneficiary. The world tilted sideways. She what? The application shows your forged signature. The premiums have been paid from one of the accounts she opened in your name. Beatrice, if something had happened to you, she would have collected $750,000. I sat down heavily, my mind reeling. The retirement home suggestions. The concerns about my mental state. The heart medication episodes that had led to emergency room visits. The constant pushing for me to see doctors, to have checkups that always seemed to result in new concerns about my health. Diana, I said quietly, was she trying to kill me? I don't know, Diana admitted. But I've seen cases where insurance fraud escalates to more active measures. The good news is that this gives us another federal charge. Insurance fraud across state lines is a serious felony. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen staring at Harold's photograph. My youngest child, the miracle baby I'd loved unconditionally, had not only stolen from me, but had financially positioned herself to benefit from my death. Every caring gesture, every health concern, every suggestion about my medical care, it all took on a sinister new meaning. Marcus and David were horrified when I told them. Jesus, Mom, David said, his face pale. What if you hadn't found out? What if you'd gotten sicker, or had an accident? She would have been rich and free, I said simply. And I would have been dead, probably thinking she was the perfect daughter who'd sacrificed everything to take care of me. That night, I called James Mitchell. I want to add attempted murder to the charges, I said. Beatrice, that's going to be very difficult to prove. Taking out a life insurance policy is an evidence of intent to commit murder. Then we'll make it hurt in other ways, I said. I want her to lose everything. Every property, every asset, every penny she stole. I want her to understand what it feels like to have nothing. We can definitely pursue full asset forfeiture, James agreed. And with the insurance fraud charge, she's looking at significant federal time. As I went to bed that night, I felt something I hadn't experienced in 4 years. Safety. For the first time since Harold's death, I was sleeping in a house where I didn't have to worry about someone going through my mail, accessing my accounts, or planning my destruction. Crystal had wanted to control every aspect of my life, to reduce me to a source of income and then dispose of me when I was no longer useful. Instead, she'd awakened something in me that she never saw coming, the will to fight back. And I was just getting started. Crystal made bail after 6 days in county jail, looking haggard and defeated as she emerged in clothes David had reluctantly brought her, simple jeans and a t-shirt, a far cry from her usual designer attire. The media was waiting, of course, She kept her head down and said nothing as her public defender hustled her into a waiting car. What she didn't know was that Diana Rodriguez had been very busy during her incarceration. "We've traced additional properties," Diana reported during our weekly meeting. She owns interests in 7 properties total, not 4. She's been using shell corporations to hide the full extent of her holdings. The scope of Crystal's operation was staggering. While playing the role of struggling artist, she'd built a real estate portfolio that would have made professional investors envious. Every property purchased with money stolen from me or her brothers, leveraged and refinanced to expand her empire. "There's something else," Diana continued. "We found records of her making inquiries about nursing homes 8 months ago. She visited 6 facilities, specifically asking about memory care units and what documentation would be required for involuntary commitment." My blood went cold. Involuntary commitment. She was planning to have you declared mentally incompetent and institutionalized. The paperwork trail suggests she was building toward that goal systematically. Marcus, who was sitting beside me, made it sound like he'd been punched. She was going to warehouse mom in a memory care facility? "It gets worse," Diana said grimly. "The facilities she toured are all expensive private institutions. The cost would have been $8,000 to $12,000 per month, paid for by your assets, of course. At that rate, she could have depleted your remaining savings within 2 to 3 years. "And then what?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Then you would have become a ward of the state, and she would have inherited everything else through her power of attorney." The plan was diabolical in its completeness. Steal everything I had while I was alive, warehouse me in an expensive facility paid for with my own money, then inherit whatever remained when I died. All while maintaining the facade of being the devoted daughter sacrificing her own life to care for her aging mother. "How long do we have before trial?" I asked James Mitchell during our next meeting. "The prosecutor wants to move quickly. With the federal charges added, we're looking at a trial date in approximately 4 months. The evidence is so overwhelming that they're hoping for a plea bargain." "No plea bargain," I said firmly. "I want this to go to trial. I want everything she did exposed in open court." James looked uncomfortable. "Beatrice, trials are unpredictable. A plea bargain would guarantee she serves time and makes restitution. If we go to trial and something goes wrong—" "Nothing's going to go wrong," I interrupted. "The evidence is solid, and I'm not afraid of testifying. I want the world to know exactly what she is." Marcus supported my decision, but David was more hesitant. "Mom, are you sure you want to put yourself through that? The cross-examination, the media attention? Crystal's lawyer is going to try to make you look confused. Maybe suggest you gave her permission for some of these transactions." I thought about that for a moment. Crystal had spent 4 years convincing everyone around me that I was becoming mentally frail, that I needed her protection and guidance. Her defense would undoubtedly try to paint me as a confused elderly woman who didn't understand what she was agreeing to. "Let them try," I said. "I've spent the last 6 months working with financial experts, private investigators, and attorneys. I've documented every fraudulent transaction, traced every forged signature, and identified every lie she told. If they want to suggest I'm mentally incompetent, they'll have to explain how someone that impaired managed to uncover and prosecute a $1 million fraud case." 3 weeks later, I got a call that changed everything. "Mrs. Eugene, this is Detective Linda Harrison with the Financial Crimes Unit. We need to discuss something that's come up in our investigation." I met Detective Harrison at the police station, accompanied by James Mitchell. She was a no-nonsense woman in her 40s who specialized in white-collar crime. "We've been analyzing your daughter's financial records as part of the federal case," she began. "We found something troubling. There are records showing she's been researching methods for administering various substances that could cause heart problems or respiratory issues in elderly individuals." My mouth went dry. "What kind of substances?" Internet searches for things like digitalis overdose, insulin manipulation, and medication interactions that could cause cardiac events. She also purchased several items online that have no legitimate use for someone in her situation. James leaned forward. What kind of items? Liquid digitalis, unmarked insulin vials, and a substance called succinylcholine, which is used in medical procedures but can be lethal if administered improperly. I felt like I was falling down a deep well. My daughter hadn't just been stealing from me, she'd been researching ways to kill me. The really disturbing part, Detective Harrison continued, is the timeline. These searches and purchases coincide with the periods when you were having those health episodes that led to emergency room visits. I remember those episodes clearly now. Sudden heart palpitations, difficulty breathing, feeling weak and disoriented. Crystal had been so concerned, so quick to call paramedics, so devoted in her care during my recovery. She was poisoning me, I said quietly. We can't prove that yet, Detective Harrison admitted. But we're exhuming tissue samples from your hospital visits to test for foreign substances. If we find evidence of deliberate poisoning, attempted murder charges will be added to the federal case. That night, I sat in my bathroom staring at my medication bottles with new eyes. Crystal had organized all my pills, set up weekly dispensers, reminded me to take everything on schedule. The perfect, caring daughter ensuring her mother's health. Except now I wondered which pills were actually mine and which ones she'd added to the mix. I called Dr. Roberts, my cardiologist, the next morning. Doctor, I need you to review my medical records from the past year. Specifically, the episodes that brought me to the emergency room. Mrs. Eugene, is everything all right? I saw the news about your daughter. That's exactly why I'm calling. I need to know if my symptoms were consistent with natural cardiac events or if they could have been caused by external factors. There was a long pause. Are you suggesting someone was deliberately causing your health problems? I'm asking you to review the medical evidence and tell me what you think. 2 days later, Dr. Roberts called me back. Beatrice, I've reviewed your records and consulted with a toxicologist. Your symptoms weren't consistent with your underlying cardiac condition. The timing was irregular, the presentation was atypical, and your recovery patterns didn't match what we'd expect from natural cardiac episodes. What does that mean? It means someone with knowledge of cardiac medications could have induced those symptoms artificially. The good news is that you're healthy, healthier than you've been in years, actually. It's as if whatever was causing those episodes has stopped. It had stopped. The episodes had ended right around the time I'd started my investigation, when I'd begun securing my medications and limiting Crystal's access to my personal items. She'd been slowly poisoning me while building a case for my mental incompetence, positioning herself to inherit everything when I died from natural causes related to my heart condition. The scope of her plan was breathtaking in its cruelty and sophistication. When I told Marcus and David, both were silent for a long time. She tried to kill you, David finally said, his voice hollow. She tried to kill me slowly, while making everyone believe she was taking such good care of me. She would have been the grieving daughter who'd sacrificed everything for her mother, inheriting a fortune as her reward. How could she do this? Marcus asked. How could anyone be that calculating? I thought about the daughter I'd raised, the little girl who'd charmed everyone with her bright smile and quick intelligence. Where had that child gone? Or had she ever really existed? I don't know, I admitted. But I know what we're going to do about it. The attempted murder charges were filed the following week. Crystal's bail was revoked, and she was returned to federal custody pending trial. This time, there would be no release. As I watched the news coverage of her arrest, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months, complete certainty that justice would be served. Crystal had gambled everything on my love, my grief, and my trust. She'd counted on my maternal instincts to blind me to her true nature. She'd miscalculated badly. The student was about to become the teacher, and class was about to begin. The trial began on a crisp Monday morning in October. I wore Harold's favorite blue dress, the one he'd always said brought out my eyes, and walked into that federal courthouse with my head held high. Crystal sat at the defense table in a gray suit her public defender had chosen, looking smaller and more vulnerable than I'd ever seen her. For just a moment, seeing her there, I felt a flicker of the old maternal instinct. This was still my child, still the baby I'd carried and nurtured and loved unconditionally. Then I remembered the digitalis, the forged signatures, the life insurance policy, the nursing home visits. The moment passed. The prosecution, led by Assistant U.S. Attorney Sarah Chun, laid out the case with surgical precision. Bank records, surveillance footage, forensic handwriting analysis, medical records, internet search histories, for years of criminal activity documented in excruciating detail. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Sarah said during her opening statement, "this is not a case about family misunderstandings or financial confusion. This is a case about a sophisticated criminal enterprise run by someone who used her elderly mother's love and trust as weapons against her. Crystal Eugene didn't just steal money. She systematically dismantled her mother's financial security, independence, and health over a 4-year period while positioning herself to inherit everything upon her mother's death." Crystal's public defender, a young man named Tom Bradley, who was clearly in over his head, tried to paint his client as a devoted daughter overwhelmed by caregiver stress. "My client spent 4 years caring for aging parents," he argued. "She sacrificed her own career opportunities to be there for her family during their darkest hours. Yes, there were financial irregularities, but these arose from confusion and good intentions, not criminal intent." It was a weak argument, and he knew it. The evidence was overwhelming. I testified on the second day of the trial. Sarah Chun had prepared me thoroughly, but I was still nervous as I took the witness stand. Crystal stared at me from the defense table, her eyes pleading in a way that might have moved me once. "Mrs. Eugene," Sarah began, "can you tell the jury about your relationship with your daughter before your husband's illness?" I spoke clearly into the microphone, addressing the jury directly. Crystal had always been my challenging child. Bright, creative, but unable to stick with anything long enough to build a career. My husband and I supported her financially for years, hoping she'd eventually find her path. "And when your husband became ill?" Crystal stepped in to help with paperwork and medical appointments. I was grateful. I thought she was finally maturing, taking responsibility. "When did you first become suspicious that something was wrong?" I told them about the bank call, about Patricia Williams, and the credit limit increase I'd never requested. I walked them through the discovery process, the investigation, the mounting evidence of betrayal. "Mrs. Eugene," Sarah continued, "the defense has suggested that you gave your daughter permission to handle your finances. Is that accurate?" "I gave her permission to help with bill payments during my husband's illness," I said firmly. "I never authorized her to open credit cards in my name, forge my signature on loan documents, or steal her brother's inheritance. I certainly never gave her permission to research ways to poison me." A murmur ran through the courtroom. The attempted murder charges were the most shocking aspect of the case. When Tom Bradley cross-examined me, he tried every angle he could think of. Was I confused about what I'd authorized? Had grief affected my memory? Was I certain about the timeline of events? I answered each question with calm precision, referring to the documentation Diana Rodriguez had helped me compile. By the time he finished, it was clear that his strategy had backfired. I didn't sound like a confused elderly woman. I sounded like someone who'd done her homework. The real fireworks came when Crystal took the stand in her own defense. Tom Bradley had tried to talk her out of testifying, but Crystal's narcissism wouldn't let her stay silent. She was convinced she could charm the jury, explain away the evidence, make them understand that she was really the victim in all this. She was wrong. Miss Eugene, Sarah Chin began her cross-examination. You've testified that you believed you were entitled to your brother's inheritance because you provided care for your parents. Is that correct? I sacrificed years of my life, Crystal said, her voice taking on the martyred tone I knew so well. While they were building careers, I was dealing with doctor's appointments and medications and watching my father die slowly. I see. And did you discuss this sense of entitlement with your brothers before forging their signatures on legal documents? Crystal's composure began to crack. They wouldn't have understood. They were too busy with their own lives to see what I was going through. So, you decided to forge legal documents rather than have an honest conversation with your family? It wasn't that simple. Sarah pulled up Crystal's financial records on the courtroom screens. Miss Eugene, you've testified about your financial struggles, but these records show rental income of over $100,000 per year from properties you purchased with stolen funds. Can you explain this discrepancy? Those investments were for my future. I couldn't depend on caretaking forever. Investments made with money stolen from your mother and brothers? I was going to pay it back.
When?
After your mother died and you inherited her remaining assets. Tom Bradley objected, but the damage was done. Crystal had just admitted on the stand that she'd been planning to repay stolen money with inheritance money she'd only receive after my death. The final blow came when Sarah introduced the evidence about the life insurance policy and the research into toxic substances. Miss Eugene, can you explain why you took out a $750,000 life insurance policy on your mother without her knowledge? Crystal's face went white. That was just financial planning. In case something happened. Financial planning that would have made you wealthy if your mother died. I never wanted anything to happen to her. Then why did you research digitalis overdoses, insulin manipulation, and purchase substances that could cause cardiac events? I was just curious. I was worried about her medications, wanted to understand them better. You were worried, so you researched ways those medications could be used to kill someone? Crystal broke down completely, sobbing and claiming she'd never meant to hurt anyone, that everything had gotten out of hand, that she'd just been trying to secure her future. It was exactly the kind of emotional manipulation I'd seen countless times, but in a federal courtroom, with evidence stacked against her, it fell flat. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. As the verdict was read, Crystal turned to look at me one last time. Her expression was a mixture of disbelief, rage, and something that might have been recognition that she'd finally met someone who wouldn't be manipulated. I looked back at her calmly, feeling nothing but a profound sense of justice finally being served. Sentencing was scheduled for 6 weeks later. Crystal faced 15 to 20 years in federal prison, full restitution of nearly $1 million, and the forfeiture of all assets purchased with stolen funds. As I walked out of the courthouse, reporters shouted questions about how it felt to see my daughter convicted. I stopped on the steps and looked directly into the cameras. Crystal Eugene stopped being my daughter the moment she decided to steal from me and plan my murder, I said clearly. Today, justice was served. That's all I have to say. That night, Marcus and David took me to dinner at Harold's favorite restaurant. We toasted with champagne, something we hadn't done since before Harold got sick. I'm proud of you, Mom, Marcus said. What you did took incredible courage. You saved your own life, David added, and probably saved other families from going through this too. I thought about that as I sipped my champagne. Crystal was intelligent, charming, and utterly without conscience. If she'd succeeded with me, she would have moved on to other victims, other elderly people who trusted their family members, other parents who couldn't imagine their children were capable of such cruelty. By fighting back, by refusing to be a victim, I'd potentially saved others from the same fate. The thought was strangely comforting as I fell asleep that night in my own bed, in my own house, surrounded by my own things that no one was trying to steal. For the first time in years, I felt completely safe and completely victorious. Sentencing day arrived with unseasonable warmth for December. I wore Harold's mother's pearl necklace, the one that would have been Crystal's inheritance if she'd chosen a different path. The irony wasn't lost on me. Crystal had lost weight during her months in federal custody. The orange jumpsuit hung loose on her frame, and her once perfect hair showed gray roots she couldn't afford to touch up. She looked every one of her 32 years, plus several more. Judge Margaret Williams was known for her tough sentences in elder abuse cases. She'd lost her own father to financial exploitation by a caregiver, and she had no patience for people who preyed on vulnerable elderly victims. Miss Eugene, Judge Williams began, I have reviewed all the evidence in this case, the pre-sentence reports, and the victim impact statements. What you did to your mother represents one of the most callous and systematic betrayals I have encountered in 20 years on the bench. Crystal sat perfectly still, her public defender having finally convinced her that speaking might only make things worse. You didn't just steal money, the judge continued. You stole your mother's sense of security, her trust in family, her independence, and nearly her life. You forged documents, committed identity theft, and researched ways to poison your own mother. You planned to have her declared mentally incompetent and institutionalized, so you could steal everything she and her husband had worked for over 5 decades. I watched Crystal's face as the judge spoke. There was no remorse there, no recognition of the pain she'd caused. Only anger at being caught and resentment at facing consequences. The court sentences you to 18 years in federal prison, to be followed by 5 years of supervised probation. You will make full restitution of $947,000 to your victims. All assets purchased with stolen funds will be forfeited to satisfy this debt. 18 years. Crystal would be 50 when she got out, assuming she served her full sentence. The real estate empire she'd built with stolen money would be liquidated. Her business interests would be dissolved. Everything she'd worked so hard to steal would be returned to its rightful owners. Additionally, Judge Williams continued, you are permanently banned from serving as power of attorney, healthcare proxy, or financial representative for any individual. You will have no inheritance rights from your mother's estate, and you are prohibited from contacting your victims directly or indirectly for the duration of your sentence. Crystal's composure finally cracked. She turned in her chair to look at me, her face contorting with rage. This is all your fault, she screamed as the bailiffs moved toward her. I gave up everything for you. I deserve that money. You should have died instead of Daddy. The same words she'd spoken in my kitchen months ago, but now they carried no power to hurt me. They were just the final confirmation that I'd made the right choice. As they led her away in shackles, Crystal continued screaming about unfairness and betrayal, completely unable to comprehend that she was the architect of her own destruction. I felt nothing but relief. After the sentencing, Marcus, David, and I met with the asset recovery team to discuss the liquidation process. Crystal's properties would be sold, her business accounts emptied, her investment portfolios cashed out. The money would be distributed according to Harold's original will, 1/3 each to his 3 children, with my portion going toward rebuilding my retirement security. It's going to take several months to complete the asset recovery, the federal prosecutor explained. But you should eventually recover most of what was stolen. Most. Not all. Some of the money had been spent on vacations, clothes, and luxury items that couldn't be recovered. Some had been lost to bad investments Crystal had made with my funds. But it would be enough to restore my financial security and provide Marcus and David with the inheritance their father had intended. What happens if she gets out early for good behavior? David asked. The restraining orders remain in effect regardless, the prosecutor assured us. She cannot contact any of you, directly or indirectly, for any reason. If she violates that order, she goes back to prison. That evening, the three of us sat in my living room, the same room where I'd confronted Crystal about her crimes months earlier. The house felt different now, lighter somehow, as if a toxic presence had been removed from the air. "Mom," Marcus said carefully, "how are you feeling about all this?" It was a question I'd been asking myself for weeks. How was I supposed to feel about sending my youngest child to prison? About cutting her out of my life permanently? About feeling relief instead of grief? "I feel free," I said honestly. "For the first time in years, I feel completely free."
No regrets?
David asked.
I thought about that.
Did I regret having to choose between justice and family loyalty? Did I regret that Crystal had forced me into a position where I had to choose it all? "I regret that it came to this," I said finally. "I regret that she chose to be the person she became. But I don't regret fighting back. I don't regret refusing to be a victim. And I don't regret making sure she faces consequences for what she did." We talked late into the night, sharing memories of better times, but also acknowledging the reality of who Crystal had revealed herself to be. She wasn't a troubled child who'd made mistakes. She was a calculating predator who'd worn the mask of loving daughter while systematically destroying the people who'd given her life. "What will you do now?" Marcus asked as they prepared to leave. I looked around my house, not Crystal's target for liquidation. My sanctuary, not her stepping stone to wealth. My home, finally mine again. "I'm going to live," I said.
Really live.
"I'm 77 years old, I have my health, I have my sons, and I have my independence back. Crystal took 4 years from me, but she's not getting another day." 6 months later, I was featured in an article about elder abuse prevention. The reporter wanted to focus on the trauma, the betrayal, the family destruction. But I steered the conversation toward empowerment instead. "People ask me how I could have my own daughter arrested," I told the reporter. "But they're asking the wrong question. The question should be, how could I not? How could I let someone destroy my life and get away with it just because we share DNA?" The article ran with the headline, "The 77-year-old who fought back and won." I liked that headline. It captured something important, that age doesn't have to mean vulnerability, that family relationships don't excuse criminal behavior, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone's destructive choices. Crystal was scheduled to be transferred to a federal prison in Texas to serve her sentence. I would never see her again, never speak to her again, never be manipulated by her again. And for the first time in years, that thought didn't make me sad. It made me free. 2 years have passed since Crystal was sentenced, and I'm writing this final chapter from my new apartment overlooking the harbor. Yes, I sold the house, not because Crystal manipulated me into it, but because I chose to. After Harold's death and Crystal's betrayal, that house held too many painful memories. This place is smaller, but it's mine, chosen by me, paid for with my money, and filled with only the people and things I want in my life. The asset recovery process took 14 months, but we eventually recovered $847,000 of the stolen funds. Crystal's real estate empire was dismantled piece by piece, her business accounts emptied, her investment portfolios liquidated. Every penny she'd built her new life on was returned to its rightful owners. Marcus and David each received $150,000, their shares of Harold's life insurance policy that Crystal had stolen. They used the money exactly as their father would have wanted. Marcus established a college fund for his children, and David expanded his construction business to create more jobs in his community. My portion has been carefully invested with the help of a financial advisor Diana Rodriguez recommended. I'll never be wealthy, but I'm secure. More importantly, I'm free from the financial anxiety that Crystal's theft had created. The house sale brought an unexpected windfall. The property had appreciated significantly over the years, and after paying off the mortgage Crystal had fraudulently arranged, I had enough to buy my new apartment outright and still have money left over. I decided to use that money for something Harold would have approved of. I established the Harold and Beatrice Eugene Foundation for Elder Abuse Prevention. We provide education, resources, and support for elderly victims of family financial abuse. We also fund legal assistance for those who can't afford to fight back the way I could. The foundation has helped over 200 families in the past year. Many of them are dealing with situations eerily similar to mine, children or grandchildren who position themselves as caregivers while systematically stealing everything their elderly relatives have worked for. It turns out Crystal wasn't unique. She was part of a disturbing trend of adult children who view their aging parents as financial opportunities rather than people deserving of respect and care. I've become something of an accidental activist. I speak at conferences about elder abuse prevention, work with law enforcement agencies to identify red flags, and counsel other elderly victims who are struggling with the decision to press charges against family members. The question I'm asked most often is always the same. How could you send your own daughter to prison? My answer has evolved over time, but the core message remains the same. How could I not? Love without accountability isn't love. It's enabling. The greatest disservice I could have done to Crystal was to continue protecting her from the consequences of her choices. Crystal writes to me sometimes, despite the restraining order. The letters are intercepted by my attorney, but he shows me excerpts occasionally. They follow a predictable pattern. Self-pity, anger, manipulation attempts, and promises to change if I'll just help her get out early. I feel nothing when I hear about these letters. The woman who wrote them stopped being my daughter long before I ever had her arrested. She became something else, a predator who wore my daughter's face while systematically destroying my life. Marcus and David have both moved closer to home. Marcus transferred to a practice here in town, and David relocated his business. We have dinner every Sunday, a new tradition we started after Crystal's sentencing. We don't talk about her unless necessary for legal matters. She's not part of our family anymore, and we've all made peace with that reality. I've learned things about myself over these past 2 years that surprise me. At 79, I discovered I'm stronger than I ever imagined, smarter than Crystal gave me credit for, and more resilient than my grief had led me to believe. Harold always said I was the strongest person he knew, but I'd forgotten that truth in the fog of loss and manipulation. The most unexpected gift has been the relationships I've built through my advocacy work. Other survivors of elder abuse, legal professionals who specialize in these cases, and even some of the investigators and prosecutors who worked on Crystal's case. We've formed a network of people who understand that family betrayal is real, devastating, and unfortunately common. Last month, I received a letter from a woman in Oregon whose son had been stealing from her for 3 years. She'd read an interview I'd given to a national magazine and wanted advice on whether to press charges. I keep thinking he's still my little boy, she wrote. How do I reconcile loving him with protecting myself from him? I wrote back immediately. The little boy you loved is gone, I told her. The person stealing from you is an adult who made adult choices and needs to face adult consequences. You can love the memory of who he was while protecting yourself from who he's become. She pressed charges. He was convicted. She got her money back and her life back. Another victory for justice over misplaced family loyalty. The strangest part of this whole experience has been how it's changed my relationship with Harold's memory. For years after his death, I felt guilty about everything, not saving him, not being stronger during his illness, not being a better widow. Crystal fed into that guilt, using it to justify her caretaking role and my supposed need for her protection. Now I understand that Harold would be proud of what I did. He would be horrified by Crystal's betrayal, but he would admire my strength in fighting back. He married a woman who built a business from nothing, who raised 3 children while he traveled for work, who never backed down from a challenge. That woman didn't disappear when he died. She just got buried under grief and manipulation for a while. Crystal thought she was stealing from a helpless old widow. Instead, she woke up a warrior who'd been sleeping. I keep Harold's picture on my mantle now, but it's joined by photos of Marcus's children, David's wedding, and pictures from my speaking engagements and foundation events. The past is honored, but it doesn't dominate my present anymore. 6 months ago, I got a call from Detective Harrison with an update I'd been expecting. Mrs. Eugene, Crystal Eugene, was involved in an incident at the federal prison. She was caught running a commissary scam, stealing from other inmates' accounts. She's been transferred to a maximum security facility and lost all good behavior credits. I wasn't surprised. Leopards don't change their spots, and Crystal was always going to find someone to victimize. At least now her victims were hardened criminals who could fight back, rather than trusting elderly relatives. How much longer will she serve? I asked. Full sentence now. 18 years, no early release possible. Good. Justice delayed had become justice denied, but now justice was finally being served completely. People sometimes ask if I ever think about forgiveness, about reconciliation when Crystal gets out. The answer is simple. There's nothing to reconcile. The daughter I raised would never have done what Crystal did. The person in prison is a stranger who wore my daughter's face while destroying my life. I don't wish her ill, but I don't wish her well either. I simply don't think about her at all most days. She's become irrelevant to my life, which is the greatest victory of all. Last week, I celebrated my 79th birthday with a party at my apartment. Marcus and David were there with their families, along with friends from my foundation work, my book club, and my volunteer activities. We toasted with champagne, told stories, and laughed until my sides hurt. As I looked around at the faces of people who genuinely care about me, not my money, not what I can do for them, but me, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: complete happiness. Crystal had tried to reduce me to a source of income, then dispose of me when I was no longer useful. Instead, she'd given me the greatest gift possible: the knowledge that I could survive anything, overcome any betrayal, and build a life worth living at any age. At 79, I'm busier than I've been in decades. I run a foundation, speak at conferences, mentor other abuse survivors, and maintain relationships with people who actually love me. I travel when I want to, spend money on things that bring me joy, and go to bed every night knowing that no one is planning to rob me, manipulate me, or harm me. I won the war Crystal started. Not just legally or financially, but completely. She wanted to destroy my independence, my security, and my sense of self-worth. Instead, she taught me that I'm stronger than I ever imagined, smarter than she calculated, and more resilient than she planned for. The student became the teacher, and the lesson was simple: never underestimate a woman who has nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. As I finish writing the story, I want to leave you with the most important message I can share. If someone is stealing from you, manipulating you, or abusing your trust, even if that someone is family, you have the right to fight back. You have the right to demand justice. You have the right to choose your own safety and security over family loyalty. Age doesn't make you powerless. Grief doesn't make you helpless. And blood relationships don't excuse criminal behavior. I was 77 years old when I decided to stop being a victim and start being a survivor. It's never too late to reclaim your power, never too late to demand respect, and never too late to win. Crystal Eugene thought she was stealing from a helpless old woman. Instead, she awakened Beatrice Eugene, and Beatrice Eugene doesn't lose. Thank you for joining me on this incredible journey of justice and redemption. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to her journey and hit that notification bell. Share your own stories of triumph in the comments below. Your courage could inspire someone else to fight back and reclaim their power. Remember, beautiful souls, you are stronger than you know, braver than you feel, and more powerful than anyone who tries to diminish you. Until next time, keep fighting, keep surviving, and keep winning.